Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going back to the 19th century, to New York City, a time when abortion was not only practiced openly, but it was a thriving business,
No, God.
led by a woman who would become a household name, Madame Ristel.
Yeah, Madame Ristel.
It might surprise you to know that for much of early American history, abortion was actually widely accepted.
Yeah, that's right. Before the late 1800s, terminating a pregnancy, before the mother felt the fetus move, what was called, quickening,
Quickening.
was a common practice. It wasn't viewed with the same uh, moral or legal scrutiny that we see today.
So what changed? How did we go from open acceptance to the heated debates that we have now? Our sources today take us through that incredible transformation, highlighting the role of key figures, social movements, and this fascinating woman named Madame Ristel.
Yeah, so understanding this shift requires going back to a time when the medical field was undergoing a major upheaval. In the early 1800s, obstetrics was becoming increasingly professionalized, with male doctors seeking to establish their dominance in a field traditionally led by midwives.
Oh, wow. That must created some tension.
Yeah.
Imagine the pushback from women who had been the primary caregivers for centuries.
Absolutely. This clash is where the story of Horatio Storer comes in. He was a physician who saw controlling abortion as a way for male doctors to solidify their authority.
So he was using abortion as a tool to elevate his profession.
In a way, yes. Storer went as far as to suggest that women, even midwives with years of experience, couldn't reliably determine when quickening occurred.
Oh, wow.
He also put forth the idea that life begins at conception, a concept not widely held at the time.
Right.
This argument, along with his anxieties about race suicide, fueled his anti-abortion campaign.
Race suicide. What did he mean by that?
Storer was deeply concerned about the declining birth rate among white Protestant women compared to other groups like immigrants. He feared this would diminish their social and political power.
It's incredible how he used these fears, these social anxieties, to advance his own, professional agenda.
Indeed, he saw eliminating midwives and those providing abortion services like Madame Ristel as essential to consolidating power within the medical profession.
It sounds like Storer was a shrewd political operator, capitalizing on existing societal fears to achieve his goals.
Absolutely. But Storer wasn't the only one campaigning against what they perceived as moral threats.
Yeah.
This is where Anthony Comstock enters the picture. A Civil War veteran, deeply troubled by what he considered obscenity, he launched a crusade against materials he deemed immoral, including information about birth control and even anatomy textbooks.
Wait, anatomy textbooks, that's surprising.
Yeah.
What did he find so objectionable about those?
Comstock saw any discussion of sexuality, even for educational purposes, as obscene. His efforts culminated in the Comstock Law 1873, which made it a federal offense to distribute materials related to contraception or abortion through the mail.
So he lumped birth control and abortion together under this banner of obscenity. That's a fascinating and crucial connection that helps us understand the trajectory of both of these issues.
Yes, and this had far-reaching consequences. Comstock's campaign, alongside Storer's medical crusade, contributed significantly to the widespread criminalization of abortion across the United States by 1880.
What a dramatic shift in just a few decades, from open acceptance to complete criminalization. This brings us back to Madame Ristel. How did these changes impact her and her thriving practice?
Well, Comstock saw Madame Ristel as a prime target. Her success, her openness, and her notoriety made her vulnerable. He set a trap, leading to her arrest in 1878. Newspapers sensationalized the story, fueling public outrage.
This must have been a devastating blow, not just for Madame Ristel personally, but for women who relied on her services.
It was. Tragically, Madame Ristel took her own life before facing trial. Her story became a cautionary tale, symbolizing the end of an era where abortion services were readily available.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of these sweeping social and legal changes. What happened to women seeking abortions after Madame Ristel's fall and the criminalization of the practice?
With abortion driven underground, a dangerous black market emerged. Women, particularly those without means, were forced into the shadows, seeking out procedures that were often unsafe and carried significant health risks.
So instead of eliminating abortion, criminalization simply made it more dangerous, disproportionately impacting those who were already marginalized.
Exactly. And as our deep dive continues, we'll see how this dangerous situation ultimately prompted a push for reform from a surprising source: doctors themselves.
Before we move on to that, let's pause here for a moment. What stands out to you so far about this historical journey? What questions are swirling in your mind, Hold on to those thoughts because we'll be back soon to explore the next chapter in this captivating story.
As we delve further into the 20th century, we witness a shift in the landscape of childbirth. Hospitals become the primary location for deliveries, and with that change comes increased medical oversight of abortion. This leads to the creation of hospital abortion review committees, making it much more difficult for women to access abortions, even in cases deemed medically necessary.
That's a striking irony. The medical profession, which played a key role in criminalizing abortion, now finds itself grappling with the harrowing consequences of that very decision.
Indeed. Doctors, once shielded from the realities of the illegal abortion market, were now confronted with the devastating results. Women suffering from botched procedures, infections, and life-threatening complications.
Yeah.
It was a stark and disturbing wake-up call.
I can only imagine the emotional toll this must have taken on physicians witnessing these tragic outcomes firsthand.
It certainly did, and it sparked a change in perspective within the medical community.
Okay.
Many doctors, recognizing the public health crisis unfolding, began to advocate for reform, even for decriminalization.
So the very profession that had pushed for criminalization was now leading the charge for reform. That's quite a turning point. What fueled this shift?
There are several factors. Doctors were seeing the real-world consequences of unsafe abortions. The women's rights movement was gaining momentum, demanding greater control over their bodies and reproductive choices, and changing social attitudes towards sexuality and women's roles in society were also playing a part.
It sounds like a convergence of social, medical, and political forces coming together to challenge the status quo.
Exactly. And as this movement for abortion rights gained momentum, a powerful opposing force began to emerge, the pro-life movement.
Tell us more about the origins of this movement. Our sources suggest a complex interplay of religious beliefs and social anxieties.
Yeah. The pro-life movement has deep historical roots, with the Catholic Church playing a pivotal role. Their long-standing belief in the sanctity of life from conception provided a strong theological foundation for opposition to abortion.
So the Catholic Church's stance was a key factor in the movement's formation. But, as you mentioned, there were other forces at play as well.
That's right. While rooted in religious conviction, the pro-life movement began attracting a broader base, appealing to those concerned about the rapid social changes of the 1960s. The sexual revolution, the feminist movement, and shifting family structures fueled anxieties among certain groups who felt that traditional values were under threat.
So they tapped into a sense of unease, a fear that society was losing its moral compass.
Yes, and they skillfully framed abortion as a symptom of this moral decline, a violation of the sanctity of life, and a threat to the traditional family structure.
This strategy proved effective in galvanizing support and broadening their base beyond purely religious circles.
Indeed. And it's within this context of competing social movements and shifting public opinions that the landmark case of Roe v. Wade emerges.
Yes, Roe v. Wade. The name itself has become synonymous with the abortion debate. Can you take us back to that pivotal moment in 1973 and explain the Supreme Court's decision?
Of course. The case centered around Norma McCorvey, known in the legal proceedings as Jane Roe, a young woman in Texas who was denied access to a legal abortion despite facing difficult personal circumstances. Texas law at the time only allowed abortions if the mother's life was in danger. Her lawsuit challenging this law went all the way to the Supreme Court.
It's incredible to think that one woman's legal battle would ultimately reshape the landscape of reproductive rights for the entire nation.
The court ruled 7-2 in Roe's favor, declaring that the right to privacy, rooted in the 14th Amendment, encompassed a woman's right to choose whether or not to terminate her pregnancy. This effectively legalized abortion nationwide.
So a monumental victory for the abortion rights movement. But the court's decision wasn't without its nuances, was it? Our sources mention a trimester framework that established limitations on this newly recognized right.
You're absolutely right. The court sought to balance a woman's right to choose with the state's interest in protecting potential life. They did so by establishing a trimester system that allowed for varying degrees of state regulation based on the stage of the pregnancy.
Can you walk us through that framework? What limitations did it impose on access to abortion?
Certainly. In the first trimester, the court ruled that the state could not regulate abortion at all, leaving the decision solely between a woman and her doctor. This emphasized the privacy and autonomy of the doctor-patient relationship during those early stages.
So, essentially, a hands-off approach by the state during the first trimester. What about the second?
As the pregnancy progressed, the court recognized that the state had a greater interest in regulating abortion to protect the health of the mother. In the second trimester, they ruled that states could regulate abortion, but only to ensure the safety of the procedure.
That makes sense. As the pregnancy progresses, the medical complexities increase, and so too does the potential for complications.
Exactly. And then we come to the third trimester, the most contentious part of the ruling.
This is where the concept of fetal viability comes into play, right?
Precisely. Once the fetus reached the point of viability, meaning it could survive outside the womb, the court ruled that the state could regulate or even ban abortion outright, except in cases where the mother's life or health was at stake.
So essentially, the court recognized a compelling state interest in protecting potential life once the fetus could potentially survive on its own. But even then, they carved out an exception to safeguard the mother's well-being.
That's right. The trimester system aimed to balance competing interests and provide a framework for navigating the complexities of abortion. However, as we'll see, this framework would become a battleground in the years to come, as both sides of the debate sought to interpret and challenge its provisions.
Before we move into that next chapter, let's pause here for a moment. What thoughts or questions does this exploration of Roe v. Wade spark for you? We'll be back shortly to delve into the aftermath of this landmark decision and the ongoing struggle for reproductive rights in America. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we were talking about the landmark Roe v. Wade decision and its intricate trimester framework designed to balance a woman's right to choose with the state's interest in protecting potential life. But as we know, the ruling didn't settle the debate, it just shifted the battleground.
That's right. While the pro-choice movement celebrated this hard-won victory, they quickly realized that the fight was far from over. They now faced the challenge of defending these newly recognized rights against a determined and increasingly organized opposition.
And on the other side, the pro-life movement, despite their initial disappointment, saw Roe as a call to action. They doubled down on their efforts, mobilizing at the grassroots level, lobbying politicians, and working to elect anti-abortion candidates.
One of their most significant strategic shifts was the adoption of what we call incrementalism. Recognizing the difficulty of overturning Roe, directly they focused on chipping away at abortion access through a series of smaller, more targeted measures.
Can you elaborate on this incrementalism strategy? What kind of measures did they pursue?
They cleverly targeted various stages of the abortion process, introducing seemingly minor restrictions that cumulatively created significant obstacles for women seeking abortions. These included mandatory waiting periods between counseling and the procedure, parental notification laws for minors, and mandatory counseling sessions, often designed to dissuade women from choosing abortion.
It sounds like a death by 1,000 cuts approach. Each restriction on its own might seem insignificant, but together they weave a web of bureaucratic hurdles that can be incredibly difficult to overcome.
Exactly. And this strategy proved remarkably effective. Over the years, we've witnessed a steady erosion of abortion access across many states, particularly those with conservative legislatures. Clinics have been forced to close due to increasingly stringent regulations, doctors have faced harassment and intimidation, and women, especially those in rural areas or with limited financial resources, have been forced to travel long distances to access care.
It's heartbreaking to think about the real-world impact of these restrictions. Women who are already facing difficult circumstances, perhaps an unplanned pregnancy or financial hardship, are now burdened with additional logistical, emotional, and financial strains.
Absolutely. And this brings us to the present moment where Roe v. Wade is facing its most serious challenge yet. The composition of the Supreme Court has shifted dramatically in recent years, with a conservative majority that has signaled a willingness to overturn or severely weaken the landmark ruling.
This is indeed a pivotal moment, one that could have profound consequences for reproductive rights in America. If Roe were to be overturned, we could see abortion become illegal in over half the states, effectively returning us to a pre-Roe era of limited access and dangerous back-alley procedures.
And the implications extend far beyond abortion itself. Overturning Roe could set a dangerous precedent, potentially jeopardizing other rights based on the right to privacy, including access to contraception and even same-sex marriage.
It's a chilling prospect that raises fundamental questions about bodily autonomy, privacy, and the role of the courts in protecting individual rights. This deep dive has taken us on an incredible journey, from the open practice of abortion in the 19th century to the rise and fall of Madame Ristel, the medicalization and criminalization of abortion, the emergence of the pro-choice and pro-life movements, the landmark Roe v. Wade decision, and the ongoing battle for reproductive rights. It's a story that highlights the complex interplay of social, cultural, political, and medical forces. It reminds us that progress is rarely linear, that victories can be fragile, and that the fight for equality and justice requires constant vigilance and unwavering commitment. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.